And we must, and I appeal, that we need a generation of leadership that's going to step up and think and act, not just think, about the long-term challenges that the nation faces, and create a solemn, basic recognition. You know, if there are 1/3 of all children who do not finish high school on time, that's costing the person that lives on the boulevard and the person that lives in the alley. It's costing every American taxpayer in more prisons. It's costing everyone in terms of lost competitive edge with China and India and other nations of the world. So let me just offer a few steps I believe that we should take. First of all, we have to get insistent and stingy. We need to set a goal as a nation that by 2025, we are going to insist that every child graduates from high school, and we will accept nothing less. And we're going to do the things we need to do in order to achieve that. So why do our children primarily go to school at 9 and the school day ends at 3? For no other reason as that's the way we've been doing it for a long time. Why is it that our children go to school 8.5 months a year? Because that's the way we've been doing it for a long, long time. Why is it that our children are required only to start school at age 5 in kindergarten? Because that's the way we've been doing it for a long, long time. Why is it that our children can't spend half a day in school, one Saturday a month? Because it might get in the way of cartoons. We have to change our thinking. What we do when it comes to that, we practice a blame game. So I sit in conversations and people say, the problem is the unions of America. Then I go in another conversation and people say, the problem is the parents of America. Then I'm in another conversation, the problem is the politicians of America. Then you're in another conversation and say, it's these students, they just don't want to learn. So everybody is looking for what? Somebody to blame. Somebody to put the hat on so they feel no responsibility. So we need a total accountability program. Parents have to be accountable, teachers have to be accountable, students have to be accountable, principals have to be accountable, politicians have to be accountable to achieve that goal. Number 2, and very importantly, we cannot let the American city die. We cannot let the American city die. We've had policies in this nation that have kicked and jeered and sneered at American cities in an effort to promote divestment. Just go look at some of the cities of Europe and look at the infrastructure and the housing and the rail systems that have been built. Cleveland is a great American city. It deserves to be invested in, not redlined. It's a city that deserves to be promoted because of what this city has meant to America in the 20th century. We need new policies when it comes to American city. Not just public investment, we need private investment. I'd like to see the nation adopt a policy that incentivizes the construction of all solar panel manufacturing and assembly plants in urban communities. Why should they be built anywhere else if the only skill that's required to work in one of those is high school and perhaps a manufacturing certificate? We've got to change people's thinking about America's urban communities. that they're assets for the nation. They define the nation. They're where the centers of excellence are, the centers of academic learning, the great cultural institutions. It's a place where great sports is played. Our cities define who we are as a nation. Number two. Number three, we must, as a nation, recognize it's beautiful to look around this room and see people of all races and walks of life. Too many rooms don't look like this room in this nation today. We are a different nation. Our children will live in a different nation. We are a nation that will no longer have a majority ethnic group by 2050. And for every single one of us, of all ethnic backgrounds, we must learn to deal with, confront, and navigate that new world. Because it is the reality of what we face. So we have to learn that inclusion and diversity are must for the future of the American nation. But here's the point that excites me. When you look at the history of great nations, kingdoms, empires, there's never been a nation like this nation. But we could accomplish something that's never been accomplished in humankind. No great nation has ever been able to be a great nation and also share with that not having a majority ethnic group. This experiment in pluralism and diversity, which began as an imperfect thing because women were excluded and African Americans were enslaved, continues to evolve, continues to move on. And maybe our charge as a generation is also to make sure that the reality of life is exactly as the words on the paper were written back in 1776 and 1789. So I share with you today the thought that we as a generation have to assume our responsibility at this time in history. We've been handed a very difficult set of challenges, a very difficult set of hurdles. But I just invite you to think about what your parents, and maybe your grandparents, and what the generation of the 20th century confronted. When they started out in 1900, they'd never seen an automobile. They'd never seen an airplane. If anyone said that a person could land on the moon, they'd be taken out and called loony. In 1900, they'd never seen a computer, a cell phone, a television, or even a radio in 1900. And in 1900, you had this masterful technological revolution that brought washers and dryers and televisions and telephones and cars and planes into our lives, and new medicines and vaccinations that lengthened people's lives. And then in the 20th century, this nation, under a president who walked with braces and a wheelchair, had to fight back successfully, I might add, Adolf Hitler and Emperor Hirohito, a two-front war, and they did it in 4 years. And that generation was also the generation that stared down the awful original sin of America, slavery and segregation, in the 1950s, and said, we're going to change it. We're going to knock these walls down. And a great movement was born that has led to a greater sense of individual rights and equality, not only for people of African American heritage, but for women